Today we hear once more the Passion narrative, this time from John's Gospel. On Sunday, on Palm Sunday, we often hear from the Synoptic Gospels. This past Sunday we heard from Luke. And there are a little bit of nuances, some differences, and sometimes we sort of forget because we hear this story so frequently, right? And in such a large capacity that we feel like we know what's going to happen, and we're sort of emotionally anticipating the next moment. We're waiting for our part as the crowd or the community or the leaders to join in and shout, "Crucify him, crucify him," and then have that internal wrestling with, what does that mean that those words just came from my lips? So today at noon, the brightest hour of the day, we are invited to explore, to identify, to name, to reject some elements of our humanity. For it was at noon, at the brightest hour of the day, upon which in John's Gospel, Jesus was crucified on the cross. That it's like the brutality and the violence and the cruelty of our humanity was shown with a spotlight. In John's Gospel, there's a lot of play of light and darkness. And a lot of things happen in the cover of the night. In the cover of the darkness, Judas betrays Jesus, right? Judas leaves the table, and then it was night. And that's when Judas goes to the religious leaders, the authorities, and says, "I will give up his place. I'll tell you where he is." It's in the middle of the night that Nicodemus comes to Jesus and has all sorts of questions and curiosity and wonderings. It's usually in the middle of the night that we see the most violence. Even today, right? Just last night, leaving from Maundy, Thursday, I was like, oh, it's so gorgeous out. I really just want to take a walk. I don't know if that's the safest, smartest thing to do. You know, there's something about the night that has this tremor. And yet, Jesus is crucified, tried, flogged, spat upon, mocked, all in broad daylight. The cross shows and reveals, holds up a mirror to the cruelty that we can find in humanity, the shadow side, the dark side, a side of betrayal, a side of violence, a side of death. Unfortunately, a side that we still dance with, right? And yet, even still, we experience very deeply, very truly, the love of God, even in this horrific act. Because even though humanity rise up to kill one for the good of all, so they say, God's love still shines through and overcomes death. We know that tomorrow evening, Sunday, we're going to hear the rest of that story. And yet today, we're stuck wrestling with our humanity, wrestling with what does it mean to be human. Throughout John's Gospel, we see time and time again in this passion narrative that we just heard, folks wrestling with and claiming their identity. And so I'm going to go through a little bit and highlight a few pieces. It's more unique to John than the Synoptics. We know that the Synoptic Gospels, right, they're telling us a summary of events. But John is more, he values more telling the meaning behind the story or the so what behind the story opposed to the what happened, okay? So we have different characters wrestling with their identity. Right off the bat, we hear about Judas. Judas's betrayal of Jesus, and we know, as Mother Adrian pointed out on Sunday, that Judas's betrayal wasn't when he got the money from the leaders and especially in John's Gospel, there's no kiss in the garden, so it's no betrayal of a kiss. Instead, Judas's betrayal happens at the communion table, at that last feast with Jesus. He leaves. He decides to leave the table, to leave communion, and that's his act of betrayal, and it was night. And then we have the disciples and Jesus gathered in the garden. We're told they often gathered in the garden. They prayed, they taught, they fellowshiped in the garden. And that's where Judas meets them with a whole gang of leaders, of police, coming to arrest him. And I imagine this little offshoot of soldiers are expecting a battle, right? We're told they've got torches, they've got their gear. They're ready for a fight. We're going to go get this dangerous man that we've heard about. And yet they show up in the garden, and Jesus says, "Hey, hi, who are you looking for?" Jesus of Nazareth. "I'm him. That's me." They fall back. Okay. "Who are you looking for?" "Jesus of Nazareth." "Yeah, that's me. Here I am. Let's go." "Oh, okay." Right? All right. So they're faced with this difference. They're expecting a battle. They're expecting a fight. They're expecting to capture this dangerous man who is just offering himself. He is solid in his own skin. He says, "I am he." And so they take him away, and little side note, we see here in John's gospel that Simon Peter, so Peter, and another disciple who knew the high priest, they follow Jesus. They go along with them, okay? And they show up to the courtyard, to where the high priest, Annas, is. And the other disciple goes in with Jesus. I kind of see this as perhaps he's going in to kind of talk on Jesus' behalf because he knows Annas. And so he goes in, and Peter waits outside. Peter's waiting. The other disciple comes, and he talks to the woman who's guarding the gate. Yes, a woman guarding the gate. And says, "All right, come on, Peter needs to come in now." So Peter comes in. And then we have this exchange. And often in the synoptics, or when we're listening to the Passion narrative, we kind of think that this denial of Peter happens outside, like he's sort of down in the town hiding. But in John's gospel, he's in the headquarters. He's in that big courtyard. He's just hanging out by the fire because it's cold. So he's hanging out with a guard that just let him in. He's hanging out with some other folks in the community. And she goes, You're with him. You're a disciple of Jesus." Notice that in John's gospel, the folks who are questioning Peter ask if he is a disciple of Jesus. Not, "You know him," but, "Are you a disciple of Jesus?" And he goes, "I am not. I'm not. I'm not." And so they're questioning Peter's identity, and he is denying his discipleship. Once again, no, I remember I saw you, right? You're one of his disciples. "I am not. And then a third time, and the cock crows. All the while that this exchange with Peter is happening, Jesus is under trial with Annas. So they're happening at the same time. Jesus is denying his discipleship at the same time. Peter is denying his discipleship at the same time. Jesus is affirming his identity, is standing stronger and stronger and saying, "Look, I have openly told everything. I've taught in the temples. I haven't shown away. I'm not resisting." He gets smacked on the face. He says, "I'm telling you the truth," right? "I'm open, I'm honest. If I said something wrong, let me know. But if I haven't, why did you hit me?" And so we have these two pieces that are happening at the same time, this struggle with identity. Jesus is claiming his identity while Peter is denying his discipleship. We know later on in the story, and I believe, Mother Adrian, you mentioned this also in your Palm Sunday sermon, that Judas, unfortunately, he claimed his identity as betrayer, right? And he didn't have that redemptive moment in his earthly pilgrimage. But this reminder that God is always extending God's hand towards us, God's love towards us, the communion table towards us. And so this belief that we understand that Judas was redeemed and is redeemed, right? With Peter, in John's gospel, as Peter denies his identity as a disciple, he says, I am not. That's significant. Where have we heard I am? Does that sound familiar, right? I am who I am. Who should I tell them who sent me? I am sent you, right? We hear this way back with Moses, the burning bush. All throughout John, we have the 7 I am statements. I am the vine. I am the truth. I am the way. I am the good shepherd. I am the life. Again and again. Jesus standing up before Annas and then later Pilate and says, I am. Jesus standing in front of the soldiers, I am he. I am Jesus of Nazareth. And then to hear Peter say, I am not a disciple in his time of fear. Then later, once Jesus is resurrected and they're on the shore of Galilee, Jesus goes to Peter, and there is kind of this redemptive act, but it's also a reclaiming of identity, where Jesus goes to Peter and says, do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. Tend my flock. No, but really, do you love me? Yes. What? Yeah, I love you. All right. Jesus is calling Peter to stand up, to claim his identity, to be the I am in the world. We're all invited into that being of the I am in the world, of being God's presence in this world, since Jesus' human body is not physically here on earth. And so Peter is the rock. Peter is the foundation of the church. Peter later on gets to claim a new identity because of the cross, because of God's love, because death does not have the final word, because betrayal does not have the final word, because violence doesn't have the final word, right? Even sometimes we deny who we are. We push our calls aside and we say, nope, that's not me. Nope. And then God keeps calling us back in and calling us back in and extending a hand and showing us love and showing us grace. And perhaps there is a time in our life that we turn and we say, yes, Lord. Yes. I have a lot of other examples of how identity comes up in this passage, but I've said some other things I had not planned on. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of them. But it would make for a very fascinating Bible study sometime. So maybe we'll do that. I'm going to jump ahead sort of towards the end. So Jesus is on the cross, and he looks down, and we're told who is around the bottom of the cross. His mother's sister, Mary Magdalene, the disciple whom he loved. And he looks down at his mother and the disciple whom he loved, and he gives them a new identity. He redefines family. He says, mother, this is your son. Son, this is your mother. And we're told from that moment on, he took her into his home. Jesus redefines what family means, what relationships mean. Even in his last moments, experienced violence from earth and humanity, he's still trying to build this community of love, community of caring, community of relationship. And then we're told that after all the violence that has ensued, Jesus claims his divinity. He says, it is finished. He bows his head and he gives up his spirit. What that must have been like. Could you imagine if we could just decide when we're allowed to pass on to the next life? Just say, this was a good day. All right, it's done. Take me home, Lord. We don't have that capacity in our humanity. But Jesus in his divinity has that grace to give up his spirit, to give up his last breath, right? And then I will throw this little piece in. We have Joseph, we have Nicodemus. They're claiming their disciplehood. They're taking care of Jesus. They're giving us a little bit of hope, right? That violence didn't win out. That the hurriedness of the leaders to, all right, come on, these guys, they got to die. We got to take them off the cross because we've got some rituals to attend to. The Passover's coming, and it's a big deal. So come on, chop, chop. Break those legs. Stab them on the side. Instead, Joseph and Nicodemus come along and say, look, let us care for this body. Let us care for our Lord, our teacher. And they care for him. You know, I do wonder how often, even today, we choose destruction over relationship, violence over love, crucifying one or the group, presumably for the greater good. If only we could just, cut down this group in our community, we could get on with our worship the way we want it. What we hear from the cross is a story that shows us the shadow side of humanity, but it also shows us abundant grace and love from God. A story that invites us to wrestle with our own identity. Where do we find ourselves in this story? Are we like Judas or Peter or Joseph? Are we Pilate? Are we one of the thieves hanging up next to Jesus? Are we Nicodemus coming in the night and then there at the end? Are we the mother, the son, redefining relationship and community? Mother Adrian, could you grab that bowl of, we've got some touchstones, and if you could pass them out. And what I'm going to invite you to do for the rest of this day, just kind of, there are different touchstones. You can just sort of pass the bowl around or whichever. And our kids and youth made these touchstones. And as you get one, usually you kind of hold it in your palm. Maybe you sort of rub it with your fingers, place it in your pocket. And throughout the rest of this day and even tomorrow, up until the vigil or up until Easter morn, whenever you're coming back for the next part of the story. Yes, sweet love. Consider where you feel you are called in this story. What's your identity? What is God's Spirit inviting you to explore about your humanity, about your call? Who do you see yourself in this story? Consider your identity as we consider the identity of Christ. This man, this God, who loves us, who showed us a new way of life, showed us a way to be in community, to be a family, to love. Hold these stones in your palm of your hand. Go for a walk, sit, pray. Think about the child, the youth who created the stone, who made either a cross or a silly little squiggle. Perhaps, how are you in relationship with them in our community? How can we stay true to our own identity so that we too can be the I ams in this world? That we can show one another that we can be the I ams in this community. To not choose violence, to not choose death, to not choose suffering above and beyond this gift of love that God gives us.